My insane sisters convinced their 10-year-old kids to destroy my phone, but their plan backfired way worse than they could imagine and eventually led to serious legal consequences. After sidestepping my two nieces, which resulted in them failing to push me into the water and thus running into the pool at full speed themselves, all hell broke loose. Most of the other guests started laughing, but their moms, who as I mentioned were pretty wasted, absolutely freaked out. Since I wasn't in swim gear, I stepped back from the pool and let other people fish the kids out. My drunk sisters and their drunk husbands began screeching at everyone in general and me in particular for not letting them have their fun. They also screamed because the two kids had been videoing the trick using their parents' iPhones, which were now at the bottom of the pool. One of my brother-in-laws got into the pool to try to retrieve the phones, but his BMI made that impossible. No one else volunteered to help, unsurprising given that my sisters were still yelling and swearing at everyone. I told my sisters it was their job to watch their kids and that if anything had happened to them, it would have been their responsibility, not mine. There were some pretty strong words on both sides. My wife and I left after the other brother-in-law fell over and face planted on the concrete while yelling at us. After we left, the party ended on a pretty sour note. My drunk brother-in-law, who face planted while yelling at me, had to go to an urgent care place and get his face stitched up. He was too toasted to drive, so Dad took him. Dad was very not happy about this. Later that evening, my sister started a group text and said some really nasty crap about my wife and me, calling me the RW. Their husbands threw in a few comments as well. My wife and I blocked the four of them. My mom called me. She was pretty upset about what they said. She and Dad were in the chat, and I don't blame her because of the text. My parents insisted my sisters and brothers-in-law come over the next day without their kids to get some things straight and lay down some ground rules. The result was an unenthusiastic apology from the nieces. Since I thought things were settled, I unblocked them that evening. I got a text from one of the brother-in-laws telling me the phones cost $750 and asking when I'd be paying for them. I replied, never took a screenshot of his text, and forwarded it to my parents with a note that we were done with this nonsense. We're going no contact with sisters and their spouses and not to invite us to any more holidays or get-togethers if they'll be present. Then I blocked the sisters and their spouses again. At that point, everything really hit the fan. Dad called them and ripped them a new one. Among other things, he told them the grandkids were not welcome at his place indefinitely since my mom regularly provides free babysitting. That got them pretty rattled. He also banned them from using the vacation house. This was an absolutely huge deal, as that vacation house was a place they stayed at quite often. My dad dropped the bomb on them that my wife and I actually owned that vacation house, not he and Mom. This completely freaked my sisters and brothers-in-law out because, as stated, both their families used the place a lot, including having their friends up for weekend getaways. This was very much out of character for my parents. They'd clearly had it. And for reference, I never wanted my sisters to know we owned the place. We bought it for my parents. They'd always wanted a place in the mountains. Keeping the ownership quiet was just a way to avoid drama with my siblings. A couple of days later, my sisters and their husbands came to our place unannounced to apologize in person. We were out to dinner, and they left a note. One sister also called me at work. I sent her to voicemail. I was ready to go no contact with them. But then everything got a whole lot worse. I recently learned that my oldest sister and her husband, they have 3 kids, have been living beyond their means for some time and are in financial straits. To understand how important this is, you need to understand that my sisters are convinced that my parents are loaded with money. They think our rich parents will give them all they own after they die, so they're not worried about money. However, my parents are not rich at all, and this leaves my oldest sister in serious financial stress. Anyway, I've also learned that my oldest sister's family has maxed out their credit cards and are behind on their car leases to the point that one is about to get repossessed. She bragged in the past about making a lot of money per year, but it turns out to be about half that. She confessed all this to Mom on Tuesday because they need a loan. And because that, for the last 3 years, instead of staying at the vacation house regularly, she's actually been renting it out once a month or so and pocketing the cash. We're talking $2,000 plus for a weekend and at least $4,000 for a week. With her being cut off from using the place, she's had to cancel one group already. She's worried they'll lose everything. My parents aren't in any position to give them a loan. My other sister was aware of her renting out the place, but of course hasn't ever said anything. I suspect she's done the same thing as well because I went up there once to drop off an ATV I'd worked on. And there was a family there who claimed to be staying there with my sister and her family, and that they'd gone to town for something. At the time, I let it go. I figured she'd loaned out the house to some friends, but I've always wondered. I found all this out through my parents, who are pretty stressed out about it. Mom more than Dad. He's mainly just ticked off about it all. I know Dad feels betrayed, and I imagine he's embarrassed that he's in no position to help his daughter out. He did reiterate that as long as it's up to him, the girls won't be using the vacation home anytime soon. My parents let me know what's going on because they figured my sisters would put a full court press on me next, and they were right. On Thursday, my sisters came to our place again without husbands this time and waited outside the door until I got home. I had to choose between fighting with them in public, them making a scene if I went in without them, or letting them in. So I let them in. I got a bullcrap story from the older sister, with the younger one backing her up, regarding why I needed to let them use the mountain place again immediately. They also said I've been a crappy brother, and that I needed to step up and plan on paying for their kids' college tuition since that's what family does. I let them pitch their story, then called them out based on what my parents had told me. Things went to crap from there. There was denial, crying, cursing, yelling, you name it. I swear my ears are still ringing 2 days later. They finally left after about an hour. After that, I took a shower and laid down. When I got up, my wife was home, and her first words were that she'd had to block more phone numbers because my sisters were blowing up our phones from new ones. Anyway, the very next day, my mom and dad told me they were done with managing the vacation home. Basically, my parents handed the responsibility for the place over to me and told me it was my problem from here on out. With the responsibility of the vacation house placed on me now, I proceeded to drive up to the vacation house and padlock the entrance gate shut with a heavy-duty chain and the best lock around immediately because I was so done with them all. I'm the only one with a key. I thought that would be enough to ensure my siblings leave the place alone. They'd probably die trying to walk 400 yards uphill to get to the house. I've also taken several more steps to secure the place. I also did a full reset on all the door keypads and created all new codes. Security cameras got installed yesterday, which is actually pretty cool because the installer convinced me to put a high-resolution one that looks out over the valley. I also installed a heavy-duty lockout for the water shutoff and drain valve. I didn't tell anyone but my wife that the water is locked off, and again, only we have the keys. Thankfully, I did this because a few days later, I got separate calls at my office from both of the husbands trying to convince me to let them use the house like they always have. The older one had gone up with some friends for a guy's hangout, but couldn't get in because of the gate lock. He was pretty mad and embarrassed about being locked out. I'm sure he would have broken the lock if he could have. During his call, he kept bouncing between pushy and victimhood. At one point, he threatened to rip that gate out of the goddamn ground. He also admitted they'd been renting it out to a few friends, that they needed the money, I was ruining their business, and that I should refund their guests' money. The other brother-in-law just sounded like he was being made to call by my sister. He didn't really put up a fight when I told him not to plan on ever using the place again. In any case, I told them they can't use the place and not to ask again. To make sure they would not try anything shady with the home, I hired a guy to manage and look over the vacation home. He has access to my camera feeds and does a physical check on the place every week or two. He also has a camera feed from a house near the start of the private road that takes still shots whenever a vehicle goes past it. And he sends photos from his walks to everyone once or twice a week. On to how my sisters and brothers-in-law were doing around this time. My parents told me that the oldest sister and her husband are getting out of the leases for their SUV and big truck and are selling their jet skis and some other stuff they've never needed. That's going to be really hard on her. She's quite the bragger and won't like being seen in something older, smaller, and cheaper. My brother-in-law's identity is very much wrapped up with his truck as well. He even has a small tattoo of the truck company's logo, which frankly is one of the many reasons why he and I never hung out. And then everything went south, and my two brothers-in-law made a decision that totally ruined the lives of them and my sisters. They broke into my vacation home and were arrested. They were charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats, all Class 1 misdemeanors. I refused to drop the charges. They were still in jail as of a day after the arrest. I finally got the full story the day after, which was that on the Friday after Thanksgiving, my brother-in-laws went to my vacation home. They used an angle grinder to cut through the chain on the driveway gate and damaged the gate in the process. They tried to get in through the front door, ruined the lock set, and gouged the door badly. They finally got in through the utility floor door and a locked internal door. They also broke into the barn. I'm not sure why. When they went out through the front door, they were met by sheriff's deputies and David, the guy I hired to watch over my property. David gets notifications from the camera system when there's activity. He saw what was going on and called the sheriff's department. According to David, the brother-in-laws tried to bullcrap their way out of it, but the deputies didn't buy it. Breaking into an empty house is a pretty serious thing up there. Usually, it's meth heads who ransack the place and hawk everything. When the brother-in-laws were arrested, they freaked out big time. were saying how they were going to beat the hell out of me, etc. Not smart to do in front of cops. David and the sheriff's office tried calling my wife and me to see what we wanted to do. But we were spending the day with her parents and had left our phones in the car so we could be in vacation mode. So they booked the brother-in-laws on everything, which is what I would have asked them to do anyway. Brother-in-laws called their wives from jail, who of course freaked out. They called my parents, tried to call me, they're blocked, tried to find a lawyer up there to arrange bail. Not easy to do, given that it's a rural area and was a holiday weekend. Older sister has zero cash, and her cards are maxed out. So if they made bail, my middle sister would have had to pay for both husbands. I ended Friday by calling the sheriff's department and telling them there was no misunderstanding. The brother-in-laws had absolutely no right to be on my property, and I wanted to press charges. I waited until Saturday afternoon to call my parents. They were both pretty rattled about it all, my mom in particular. My sisters had browbeat them into telling me I should tell the cops it was all a mistake and that I wanted the charges dropped. I refused flat out, told them there was no way I'd do that until I spoke with an attorney, and also not until I was paid in full for whatever it will cost to fix everything. 100%. My mom was crying hard by the time we got off the phone, which of course made me feel like crap. My dad suggested it was time for a complete start over, but also said he thought they needed to pay for the damage. I proceeded to leave messages with 2 attorney friends asking them to recommend the right lawyer to go after my sisters and brother-in-laws. The next week, I got a courier-delivered envelope at my office. And it was a signed letter from both my brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. In the letter, they made what I have to say was a really sincere apology. Among other things, they acknowledged breaking in, acknowledged it was wrong, said the $5,000 was to pay for the damage, and that they'd pay more if it cost more than that. They also said they'd stay away from the vacation home unless my wife and I specifically invited them. They also asked that I do what I could to get the charges dropped as soon as possible because they both could lose their jobs, and that they'd agree to a restraining order or whatever else it took for that to happen. There was more as well, all conciliatory, but that's the gist of it. To say this was a shock is an understatement. It was a total 180 from their past behavior. I'd already made an appointment with an attorney to see about suing my brother-in-laws over the damage and to try to get a restraining order. I called him and told him what I'd just received, and he agreed to meet with me at the end of the day instead of next week. He told me not to deposit the check. We met for about 2 hours. He ended up recommending the wife and I do a settlement and mutual release agreement with all 4 of them, sisters and brother-in-laws. He said if we went after them via a lawsuit, that we'd almost certainly win, but that it could take 2 years or more. There would be sizable upfront legal fees, and that we might never see any money. He also said we could keep the $5,000 free and clear, even if we didn't let them off the hook. He's drawing up the agreement. It won't be ready until Monday. The agreement will include what's essentially the civil equivalent of a restraining order. I'd already asked my property manager to work up a bid to get the damage repaired. I called him after the meeting and asked that he get me as close to an estimate as possible ASAP. I got that Friday. He thinks it will take around $4,000 to fix everything. Most of that is for the front door. On Friday, my attorney contacted each of the brother-in-laws, told them what we were proposing, and advised them to get their own lawyers. They both agreed to it. The middle brother-in-law told them they could afford to either pay for the damages or pay for a lawyer, but not both. And they figured a lawyer wouldn't make any difference, given that they really had no defense for what they did. His biggest concern was if the charges could be dropped. From what I can tell, they're willing to do anything, sign anything to make this all go away. My attorney also called the Dawes office on Friday to discuss dismissing the charges, got the name of the prosecutor, and left them a message but has not spoken to them yet. He thinks they'll dismiss the charges because the brother-in-laws are paying up and they have no priors. But then again, he's not a criminal lawyer. He also said I should be prepared to drive up there and tell the prosecutor in person that I want everything dismissed. He's also advised me to continue to be no contact with sisters and brother-in-laws, especially for the next 6 months, and that it will be really important to follow the terms of the agreement when it comes to future interactions with them. I'm guessing that the brother-in-law's change of heart is due to them having figured out what's at stake for them, what it's going to cost them in legal fees and fines, and so on. There's also the highly unlikely possibility that they could go to jail for up to 120 days. And as I've mentioned, one of them has a security clearance for his job that could be at risk. So this is their Hail Mary pass to keep their normal lives. Kind of a side issue, but getting the written apology was weirdly a huge moment for me. I wasn't expecting that ever, but apparently it matters to me quite a bit. The money doesn't feel particularly important at this moment. I'll damn sure take it, though. Also, I'm pretty certain my middle sister and her husband came up with the money. The cashier's check is from the credit union of the company he works for. Update. Last week, I met with my attorney and went over the agreement, changed a couple of minor things, and he sent it to my sisters and brothers-in-law. It included a requirement that they pay my attorney fee, about $3,000. They weren't happy about that and tried to negotiate it away. But he told them they either accept it as is or there would be no deal at all, and we'd proceed with suing them for the money they got from renting out the place, wear and tear from renting it, repair costs from their break-in, emotional distress, lost income from having to deal with this, attorney fees, and whatever else we could. He also told them I would push hard with the Dawes office to prosecute every charge. Short version, they came in and signed. I wasn't there. I'm told it was a pretty tense environment, that the middle brother-in-law appeared to have taken charge, and that at one point he told both of my sisters to shut the hell up, or he was walking away from the whole thing, making his own deal. The brother-in-laws did not resist arrest. If they had, none of the charges would have been dropped. I also went to the sheriff's office to thank them for getting there so quickly. I wanted to thank the deputies personally, but only spoke to the dispatch person. I tried to meet up with David, the property manager, but couldn't get hold of him. A couple of notes. The agreement includes a no-contact clause. Basically, if any of them show up where my wife or I are, or vice versa, whoever got there last has to leave immediately. No contact except through attorneys or other mutually agreed upon third parties. They get to keep whatever they made from renting the vacation house. My big give, unless I have tax consequences, which they will be responsible for. We release each other from all other liabilities up to the present. There's more to it than that, but those are the high points. My wife and I will sign the agreement later today. After that, I can't talk about most of this, but I can talk around it.